Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. When we think of military history, we usually picture sweeping campaigns, complex geopolitical maneuvering, massive clashes between nations. But today, we're going to examine one of history's most bizarre and, frankly, unexpected military blunders. We're looking at the true story of the time the Australian military deployed armed soldiers to fight a rapidly growing, crop-destroying population and somehow managed to get completely outmaneuvered. I know, it sounds like a joke, right? It sounds like a punchline to a surreal comedy sketch, but it absolutely happened. In late 1932, the Australian government officially deployed the Royal Australian Artillery to combat a massive flock of flightless birds. And spoiler alert for this whole thing, the birds won. So, to understand how such a wildly unexpected military failure actually went down and why human firepower proved so incredibly useless against the natural world, we really need to set the scene. Let's look at the desperate circumstances that sparked this whole conflict. To really understand the threat, we have to look at who was actually living there. We're talking about post-World War I veteran farmers in Western Australia. Through the soldier settlement scheme, thousands of veterans had been given land to cultivate wheat. But by 1929, they were facing a literal perfect storm of hardship. The global Great Depression had sent wheat prices absolutely plummeting. And to make matters worse, a devastating drought had ravaged the land. So you've got these veterans already struggling just to survive on their incredibly isolated farms. But honestly, the collapsing economy and the punishing weather were kind of nothing compared to the encroaching army headed their way. Driven by that exact same drought, 20,000 desperate emus began migrating from the Australian interior. They were pushing towards the coastal regions, desperately searching for food and water. And what did they find? A veritable all-you-can-eat buffet. The carefully cultivated, artificially watered wheat fields of those struggling veteran farmers. Now, we have to talk about our adversary here, because the emu is an absolute unit of a bird. Standing up to 1.9 meters, that's over 6 feet tall. This is the second largest bird in the entire world. They are highly nomadic, incredibly fast, and just unbelievably resilient. So when this massive flock of 20,000 birds reached agricultural districts like Campion and Walgoolan, they didn't just casually walk in. They smashed right through the farmers' rabbit-proof fences to feast on the wheat, leaving these massive, gaping holes that allowed other pests, like rabbits, to just pour in right behind them. It was a complete disaster. Completely overwhelmed by the destruction and facing total financial ruin, these veteran farmers knew exactly what kind of firepower was needed. They actually bypassed the agricultural authorities entirely and went straight to the top. They petitioned the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pierce, and specifically requested machine guns. And surprisingly, Pierce agreed. He dispatched members of the Royal Australian Artillery to handle this avian invasion. I mean, the mission probably seemed super simple on paper, right? Deploy heavy weaponry, call the native species, and save the wheat harvest. Easy. But the sheer absurdity of this battlefield matchup is just staggering when you look at the details. On one side, representing the Australian military, we have Major G.P.W. Meredith, accompanied by Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran. Literally 3 human soldiers. Now, they are armed with 2 Lewis light machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. And on the other side, 20,000 hardened, fast-moving survivors of the intense Australian outback. So, how did this actually play out? Well, it escalated into a disastrous week-long campaign that began in the Campion district and basically ended in total military humiliation. The conflict officially kicked off on November 2nd. The troops spotted about 50 birds, chased them into range, opened fire, and only managed to kill about a dozen. Not a great start. 2 days later, on November 4th, they tried to ambush a massive flock of 1,000 emus by a dam. They waited until the birds were at point-blank range, but the Lewis gun jammed almost immediately. By November 8th, the government was so embarrassed, they were forced to order a tactical withdrawal. You might be wondering, how does modern weaponry fail so spectacularly? Well, the simplistic military strategy of just mowing them down en masse completely failed because the emus intuitively deployed brilliant guerrilla tactics. The second they heard gunfire, they didn't group together. They scattered rapidly in all directions, making them practically impossible to target. On top of that, an army observer actually noted that each pack seemed to have assigned a tall, black-plumed leader bird. This leader would stand fully 6 feet high, keeping watch and signaling the rest of the flock at the very first sign of a human approaching. This is a crucial point. Human technology proved completely useless in the outback environment. And nothing demonstrates this better than Major Meredith's next grand tactical idea. He decided to mount a Lewis machine gun onto a truck to chase down the fast-moving birds. Great idea, right? Well, reality quickly set in. The truck couldn't even come close to keeping up with the top speed of an emu. Plus, the rugged, unpaved Australian terrain made the ride so incredibly bumpy that the gunner couldn't even aim, let alone fire a single successful shot. The emus simply sprinted away, completely unharmed.
Despite being a seasoned military man, Major Meredith was genuinely awestruck by his enemy. He submitted this incredibly deadpan, totally serious assessment to military command, literally comparing the birds to armored vehicles. He noted that they seemed able to just shrug off even serious bullet injuries without breaking stride. Think about that for a second. When the commanding officer is comparing your native wildlife to invincible tanks, you know the operation has gone entirely off the rails. The sheer scale of this failure really hits home when we look at the hard data. By the time the government stepped in and recalled the troops in early November, those soldiers had fired a staggering 2,500 rounds of machine gun ammunition. They had chased the birds across the scorching red dirt, set up ambushes, attempted vehicular warfare. They spent an incredible amount of military time and resources.
And yet, despite that massive expenditure of firepower, the military had only managed to achieve somewhere between 50 and 200 confirmed emu casualties. The math there is just staggering. It means it was taking roughly 10 to 50 rounds of heavy machine gun fire just to bring down a single bird. The sheer inefficiency was a massive PR nightmare. A federal parliamentarian even sarcastically suggested that if medals were to be awarded for this war, they should go to the emus, since they had won every single round so far. So, what happened next? Well, acknowledging defeat, though there was a brief secondary deployment later on, the government eventually realized that sending the army just wasn't the answer. Defense Minister Pierce was even mockingly dubbed the Minister for the Emu War by his critics. Eventually, the state pivoted to a way more decentralized and effective solution. They provided ammunition directly to the farmers and instituted a bounty system. And this proved devastatingly effective, yielding over 57,000 claims in just 6 months in 1934. Later on, in the 1950s, they constructed taller, modernized barrier fences with barbed wire, which finally provided a permanent solution to managing the birds' migration routes.
As we wrap up this explainer, I think it's clear why this bizarre historical footnote remains one of the most fascinating military stories of the 20th century. It leaves us with a really humbling reminder. We so often assume that human technology and sheer force can just bulldoze over any environmental obstacle. But the Great Emu War proves that no matter how much firepower we bring to the field, nature is remarkably adaptive, fiercely resilient, and it will almost always find a way to outmaneuver us. So the next time you think humanity has completely conquered the natural world, ask yourself, how well would you really fare against 20,000 flightless birds?